Since 2020, I reframed my thinking about how I view myself. I learned two very important things. First, that asking for support is the best gift I could give to both myself and those I love. And second, that making myself a priority completely changed my narrative. No one could have predicted there would be a global pandemic. All households would be placed under quarantine for months. I would be painfully unemployed for over a year. People would connect, work, and learn remotely. Anxiety and depression would infiltrate my entire family. And the craziest thing I never would have predicted was that I'd be purchasing special makeup, jewelry, outfits, and even lighting just for Zoom meetings, virtual interviews, and FaceTime get-togethers with friends and family. Sounds like a true recipe for disaster, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, with a little reframing of mindset, anyone can turn a negative experience into a positive outcome, even during a global pandemic. Finding myself unemployed for the first time in my life took me from running at 100 miles an hour to zero overnight. It was with the help of the program from Noom.com that I was able to realize a key insight about myself. I am not what I do. It all started with my desire and commitment to be the healthiest person that I could be, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Through that commitment to myself, I uncovered that I'm whomever I want to be. With time on my hands, I found myself wide awake at all hours of the night. Sometimes I'd wake up in a panic, unable to breathe. Other times I found myself binge watching shows just for the fun of it. I found Brene Brown's The Call to Courage on Netflix. She discussed what it takes to choose courage over comfort in a culture defined by scarcity, fear, and uncertainty. Sounds familiar, right? It was this film that helped me to get off the couch, out of my loungewear, and find the courage to act and put my life back on track. I knew I had to focus on finding a job. I used to think that finding a new job was like running the 50-yard dash, a short-term competitive solo sports event. I constantly applied for jobs and called anyone and everyone in my network who might be able to help me, including recruiters. I was hopeful that I would be gainfully reemployed in the next 3 to 6 months. I learned quickly that I had to reframe my mindset, otherwise I was going to burn out fast. Now I know that finding a new job is like running a marathon. You have to pace yourself. But in this case, rather than being your competition, the runners are at your side to help you get over that finish line, even if that means picking you up when you fall. As humans, we love to help others, but we need to be asked. I learned to stop and ask others for support and point me in the right direction. I worked with career coaches, resume writers. I had virtual coffees with people I've never even met before and listened to their stories. But the best part, I applied to positions for only a few hours each day. I took breaks to replenish my energy levels several times a day. I spent time with family, cooking together, laughing together, taking long walks, and even training to run a 5K. I even spent time alone doing absolutely nothing. My bestie reminded me that I should be utilizing my innovation skills to reinvent myself. I pulled out the book, Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans to help me map out the next 3 to 5 years. I don't know if this holds true for any of you, but I used to think that I could and should only apply to open positions that I was fully qualified for, or even worse, for jobs that I've already mastered. By leveraging the tools in the book, now I know that my skills are transferable and I can custom design the role that I want. I created my ideal job description with emphasis on my strengths and balanced it with the areas where I wanted to grow. I learned that any skill that I didn't have on a job description, I could learn on the job and master over time. I found that dream job at Mueller Sports Medicine. Last but not least was the hardest hurdle to overcome. I needed to get out of my own way. I heard Catherine speak at a 3% conference. I bought her book. It acknowledges all the impossible expectations we place on ourselves as women, as spouses, as mothers, as employees, and as leaders. My final reframe. I used to think that I must put others' needs ahead of my own. I was raised this way. If I put myself first, I was considered selfish in the eyes of my family and childhood friends. I carried this belief into adulthood and into my professional career. After reading Catherine's book and being totally honest with myself, now I know that if I don't place myself first, I can't help anyone else when they need me most. When my anxiety led to depression, I sought medical treatment. I asked for the support of family, friends, colleagues, and even my new boss, so I could return to being my best self as soon as possible. Because I took the steps needed to take care of myself, I was able to be 100% present when members of my family each took turns struggling with anxiety and depression. We now have a support system in place to ensure that each of us receives the help that we need when it comes to our mental health. So who am I? I know that I am not a short order cook, a housekeeper, an elementary school teacher, a doggy daycare worker, or even a frontline medical professional. But today I can say that I am intuitive, an innovator, a connector, empathetic, resilient, and most importantly, ever-changing. My silver lining: no one could have predicted that a global pandemic would lead to healthy routines. Months of quarantine would lead to priceless family time. Being unemployed for over a year would allow me the time to reinvent myself and find my dream job. Remote work would force me to create quiet spaces that I've now duplicated in my Zen office at work. Anxiety would help me move my needs to the very top of the priority list. And living through depression taught me it's safe to allow others to help. And if there's one takeaway from my talk today, always remember, life is a journey. Don't be afraid to explore it. Thank you.
By show of hands, who's heard the saying, "That's the way the cookie crumbles"? Tell me, when you heard this, what did you think? I tell you what I thought. It left me thinking, well, I guess there's nothing left to do. It is what it is. But what if you decided to choose to see things a little differently? I would like to tell you a story of strength, embracing your now, and allowing grace. Last year, despite the country reeling from the throes of COVID-19, I found myself in a really good place. You see, I decided to step out on faith. I left a job where I had been employed for 6 years to join a new organization, become a new people leader, all in the middle of a pandemic. Sounds interesting, right? Shortly after embarking on this new adventure, I noticed some changes in my body that were cause for concern. A trip to the doctor's office turned my world upside down. What should have been a routine procedure became a defining moment as to whether or not I would be a mother. I remember thinking, how could this be happening? Here I am excelling professionally, finally. How could things be going so wrong personally? It forced me to come to grips with the question I had been asking myself. Will I ever have a child of my own? You see, I was one of those people who thought they had the luxury of time. Time isn't always on our side, you know. Thus began my journey to discovering what was right for me. In the beginning of my journey, there were a lot of tears. I felt hopeless and helpless. I was hard on myself. I mean, did I focus too much on my career and my education? This was a one-way ticket to the land of self-doubt and insecurity. I became resentful towards my husband because he just couldn't seem to understand mourning the loss of something you never had. I was in a low place. One day, while watching a commercial that included a scene of a child's birthday party, I started to cry uncontrollably. Something had to give. A light bulb went off, and I realized I hadn't told a soul about what I was going through. I was suffering in silence. The question is, why? I knew I couldn't go on like this. So I found a therapist and I started to talk about it. I found a friend and I talked some more. I read books, I listened to podcasts. I needed to refill and reset. You know, there's power in telling your story, right? I began to realize that my life gets to be what I make it. Yes, this sucks, but this is only one chapter of my book, one piece of my puzzle, and yes, one crumble of the cookie. I don't know where this journey to motherhood will take me. Will I be a mom? I don't know. But I am embracing my to be continued, and I'm leaning into the things I do know. And what I know for sure is when faced with things that are out of your control, don't feel like you have to suffer in silence. I invite you to remember these 3 things. You are stronger than you think. It's okay to not have all the answers and to give yourself grace. The cookie, my life, may have some crumbles, but it's still a cookie. And as you leave here today, I invite you to think about your own cookie, your life, and its crumbles, and find the acceptance you need for your journey. Thank you.
While starting out my career in communications, I had an extremely difficult time securing my first position. I applied to over 200 jobs until I finally found one at a nonprofit management organization that led me to move to the Milwaukee area. As I found my place in my new home, I pushed my introverted self to join local organizations and become involved in my new community. Through this work, I met Karen, a woman I truly admired and felt fortunate to be mentored by. After knowing Karen for a few years, the organization where she worked had a vacancy to which she invited me to apply. And on August 1st, 2016, I was elated to be filling that vacancy. It was a significant pay and responsibility increase at a notable nonprofit with national ties. As I settled in, I was introduced to my new team, Mandy, Mimi, and Ryan. I was nervous to begin this job and was not confident in my abilities to succeed. However, it helped immensely to be working for my mentor, Karen. She assured me and was always ready and willing to help. As I got settled in and first days turned into first weeks, which turned into first months, I acclimated to the dynamics of my new team. I noticed that Mimi and Ryan seemed very close as teammates, which I attributed to the fact that they both started at the same time and much of their positions overlapped. I immediately noticed that Ryan had an off-color sense of humor. As Mimi and Mandy laughed, I went along with it and assumed the best intention. Over time, I had more run-ins with Ryan that made me feel uncomfortable, but never enough that made me feel like I needed to escalate it. For example, a coworker had brought in brownies to share. When I walked in to grab one, Ryan said to the entire room, "Of course Christine comes running in. There's food in here." Or, "Think of your wedding dress." Mimi and Mandy confided in me that they also had uncomfortable conversations with him. As time went on, there were other comments. On a trip back to the office from a work outing, Ryan went into graphic detail about a sexual assault he had heard about on the news. Another time, he asked me what I thought about gigolos. Anytime I told him that it was inappropriate, he scoffed and changed the subject. At one point, I asked him to stop, and he did for a few months. I subtly alerted my boss to some of the issues. When he picked up again, I decided to make a log of all of our interactions that made me feel uncomfortable to see if it was worth formally reporting. Over time, my uncomfortableness grew. The situation finally reached a head when Ryan took something that was mine from my desk. When confronted about it by one of our coworkers, not even me, he blew up with anger and told my boss that I had disrespected him. My boss unfairly reprimanded me. And at that point, I decided to formally report all of Ryan's actions and asked Mimi and Mandy if they would like to come with me. Between the 3 of us, we had more complaints than I could have imagined. As allegations began to come out against Harvey Weinstein, we were caught up in our own whirlwind between meetings with HR and a surprise testimonial to our company's lawyer. After that, every day, we'd get an email that Ryan wouldn't be in the office with no other information. After weeks of this, Mimi, fearing for her safety, expressed her concern to me, and I told her that wasn't okay. So we went in and talked to our boss, Karen, to see if we could get some clarification, who then yelled at us for about half an hour about how horrible we were to do this to the organization. Eventually, we were notified that Ryan was no longer employed there. In the months following, in what we thought would be an easier environment to work in, we dealt with the repercussions of the situation. It was never released why Ryan was let go, and we were told not to talk about it. I did find out that the harassment was much worse for my coworkers than it was for me. At the next full company meeting, we all received sexual harassment training by the same lawyer we had talked to, explaining the situations that we had confidentially outlined to her, all while our oblivious coworkers had to express how they would respond to the situation, and while our executive director proclaimed that he felt lucky that we had never had to deal with a situation like this. When my annual review rolled around, my boss Karen docked points in the ethics portion of my evaluation because I had reported the situation. It never got better for me. As much as I hoped each mention would be the last, it constantly came back when I was at work. And when I was at home, I was constantly bombarded with more and more women coming forward to speak out against Harvey Weinstein and more people speaking out in the Me Too movement. I felt like I couldn't get away from it. I started having panic attacks in my boss's office, someone I once held so much respect for. When I finally handed in my notice, the executive director told me, "I don't want to sound like your dad, but I think you're making the wrong decision." Since then, I've had the absolute pleasure of working in safe, functional, and healthy work environments. I've given myself permission to step away and time to heal. As terrible as it was to go through this, it made me stronger, made me realize my value, and it helped me find my voice. Reflecting back on the situation, I'd like to remind everyone of 3 things. First, you deserve to feel comfortable and safe at work. Second, speak up, use your voice, and don't stay silent. If you're not sure whether it's worth reporting, do it anyway, because you never know if it's much worse for someone else. And finally, you have the right to remove yourself from the situation. If nothing else works or you don't want to deal with it anymore, you don't have to. You're not a job hopper. You aren't going to regret finding a better environment. You deserve better, and better is out there. Thank you.
I'd like to see a show of hands. Who loves getting holiday letters? Who loathes them? Confession time, I'm with the lovers. I had always been a consumer and never a creator until 2012. Then I stared at 125 beautiful year-old birth announcements. Serious consideration was given to throwing them away and pretending the past year had never happened. Instead, I told my story of postpartum depression. It read, "Last Christmas, we never got cards out as we anticipated the arrival of Rachel. 3 weeks later, I had high hopes of getting them sent. You might note from the enclosures, yours didn't get lost in the mail. Instead, I was back in the hospital requiring surgery and a blood transfusion due to delivery complications. Life became a struggle. Instead of feeling better each day, a fog rolled in and suffocated me. Physically, I was fine. Mentally, a wreck. Anxiety-ridden, filled with self-doubt. I could barely leave the couch, let alone the house. We count my doctor in our blessings as he recognized the signs of my postpartum depression and got me on the road to recovery. That letter started as an excuse, and it became my saving grace. Letting the truth out freed me from guilt and shame, as well as brought me into community so that the hard work of healing could be done. Today, I want to leave you with several takeaways. A brief education on postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, why telling our stories and sharing our struggles is necessary, and sharing storytelling tips. Yours doesn't have to start with a holiday letter. Let's get into the facts about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. 1 in 7 mothers suffer postpartum. The range of disorders includes depression, anxiety, OCD, and psychosis. This may be the most important thing I share today. These mood and anxiety disorders are treatable and temporary. However, only 15% who suffer receive proper treatment. There are a myriad of reasons women don't get treatment, but one we can control is starting the conversation with our care provider to get a diagnosis and begin effective treatment. The new Mom Mental Health Checklist is a tool to have that conversation. It brings words in plain mama English that crystallize how we are feeling and suffering. If you or a loved one doesn't feel heard or come away from that conversation with a plan, find another doctor who will listen and help. That's where resources are important, and I want to highlight two of many. Postpartum Support International has coordinators across the globe to help, encourage, and find resources. Here in Southeastern Wisconsin, we have the Mom's Mental Health Initiative. They offer local peer support and a vetted list of practitioners who are experienced in maternal health. Once a mother has talked to her doctor, she's demonstrated courage in telling a difficult story and advocating for herself. Continuing to share her story with those who love and support her is critical in her recovery. Remember, we all have difficult stories that are part of us, and telling them helps us integrate them into our lives and move through the shame, grief, and loss they brought. Additionally, telling our stories of struggle builds bridges. Our bravery in revealing our truth helps us realize we were never alone. It never ceases to surprise me just how many people I encounter who are living with some private struggle. These human experiences, not shortcomings, allow us to cross over differences that might otherwise feel insurmountable. How do we share our stories? Start small and safe. I told my story dozens of times before I wrote the letter. Almost always, it went well and built my confidence in sharing. For the times it doesn't go well, remind yourself people's reactions are their own and not about you. Sometimes my story triggered a tender part within the recipient that caused a reaction lacking empathy, disqualifying, or minimizing. If it happens to you, it's not to be taken personally. You might have tender parts as well, and those need to be honored. It's not your responsibility to share everything. You get to choose the pieces shared. Work in layers, like winter dressing. Start with the base layer and determine how much to add. Then layer on more truth, share your hard parts, and then maybe share the very hardest parts. Lastly, trust yourself and know that what's right might change depending on your emotions, time, and the audience. What happened after that 2012 holiday letter went out? The big surprise was getting letters and messages from women who I loved and admired. Many told their own story of suffering. I realized that this abnormal postpartum experience was actually quite common. I slowly relinquished the shame I felt in my experience. Empathy of others helped me recognize it wasn't my fault. Shared bravery in telling our truths drove me to find community who understood what I had been through. Sharing grace with those who had similar experiences helped build my own self-compassion. Whatever your difficult story is, be brave, speak your truth, build community. That's the silver lining.
The girl behind the smile knows the loss of her parents, illness, suicide, addiction, and tragedy beyond anyone should ever have to know. But she also knows the power of her own voice and has the strength of the community of people she's built behind her. This is my story. This is Words That Stick. My journey starts out with my father, John Rowe, who was my biggest advocate and mentor. He sacrificed his thriving career the day my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in order to take care of her and to raise 4 children. He did have one motto though, and that was smile through the pain. He didn't want us to show any signs of weakness or ask for help. This would have been a wonderful philosophy to live by if it wasn't for my mother passing away. I was only 16 years old. My dad was so succumbed with grief and agony that he didn't know how to express the emotions that he was feeling. The only way he knew how to smile was to turn to drugs and alcohol. Over the next 2 years of my life, my dad would attempt suicide 3 times. In his 3rd attempt, he would succeed. My father shot himself 5 feet from where I was standing. His final note to us was, "I'm sorry, I'm heartbroken, and now it shows." Overnight, my life changed. I went from having a house, a family, a pursuit of college, to my new reality, paying for a funeral, working 3 jobs, and finding a way to support myself and my younger brother. Did have a lot of people who came to my help and supported me. One of those people is actually the reason why I'm a member of Tempo. Jennifer Barlotta, this one goes out to you. At 18 years old, you told me, in life there are hard decisions, but it can get easier as long as you align 3 things. You need to make sure that your mind, your heart, and your stomach are all connected. Using your words, I took a job at 20 years old, and I'm so glad I did. Because while working for this company for the next 6 years of my life, I worked my way out of poverty, bought a house, helped my brother get into college, and my personal favorite was graduating from Alverno by working full-time and going to school on the weekends, doing so in 3 years with a 4.0 GPA. On the outside, I was thriving, but on the inside, I was very much suffering. This company no longer aligned with who I was, and I knew I needed to leave, especially when I was pulled into my boss's office at 26. He sat me down and was like, "Crystal, you and my then boyfriend, Blake, now husband, are getting pretty serious. And I'm wondering, because you're of childbearing age, what type of mother do you think you'll be?" Words that stick, right? I didn't know how to respond to that. I reverted back to my dad's life lesson of smiling through the pain, and I answered as best I could. And you think I would have left that organization then and there, but I didn't. I didn't have the courage until 1 year later at 27, when my life changed overnight one more time. I got terribly sick, and little did I know then, but I'd spent 5 months unable to use my body for 4 herniated discs in my neck. I developed 3 blood clots in my lungs from the immobility and use of my body. I need 2 cortisone shots just to help me get up. And I'd have 1 life-changing surgery. And I say life-changing because that's exactly what it was. I remember being in the hospital thinking, like, how could life get any worse? All of a sudden, the nurse brings in a little slip of paper and asks, "Can you sign here?" This paper basically said that I had been emitted with so much radiation over the last 5 months that I now put myself at cancer or getting cancer. I looked down at the paper and I started crying. And I cried and I cried until there was nothing left. And in that moment of pure isolation and lonesomeness, I realized that in life, there's some words that stick and there's some words that need to be unstuck. And this paper certainly was one of those things that was not going to define me. Because if my past and all the things that were holding me down didn't dictate the accomplishments that I was able to achieve, then this slip of paper wasn't going to keep me from living my most beautiful life. And I realized that we are all rooted in pain. We're all going through some internal conflict or battle. And that's what makes us human. It unites us all and makes us common. But it's how we respond to that pain that makes us different. And I was choosing something different. So then and there, I made a pact with myself that I would start saying yes to who I was. I said, say yes to yourself, because the world, your boss, your family, your siblings, a coworker, someone's going to tell you no. So I said, if I got better, I would quit my job and I'd start saying yes to myself. And that's exactly what I did. If you're curious and wanting to know, I'm almost 30 now. And over the last 3 years of my life, here are the biggest milestones that I've said yes to. I said yes to a new job. I work for a company called Dursey, which is a face-to-face marketing firm here in Milwaukee. I get to work with organizations large and small, transforming their places of work and their product experience centers from something old and mundane like this to something magical and elevated. I said yes to marrying my best friend, Blake, who had to take on so many roles in our relationship as my doctor, my coach, my mentor, and my therapist. Blake, I love you, honey. I also said yes to wanting to start a family with him, and we're expecting a baby girl in February. So now, with this newfound perspective on life, if I reflect back onto that one question, what type of mother do you think I am? I'd have to quote Glennon Doyle and say, I'm a goddamn cheetah.